Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony Blanc, and today I'm in conversation with a gentleman that all Aurigny residents would have met when he was station manager at Southampton Airport. We're going to take a look at the history of Southampton Airport and its future prospects. Maurice, good to see you.
Hi, good morning, Tony.
Before we start, though, I think we should just mention, have a few words about the late John Cadoret, who died recently, who,
Yeah.
was in Aurigny right from the outset. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, John was there obviously when I started in 1971. He was really in Aurigny right from the outset, I think, either 68 or 69 in the operations department. And he was sort of pivotal, really, to Aurigny's development, I think, into the airline it became. And it's really such a sad loss because it's so sudden. As far as I know, nobody was aware he was particularly unwell,
No.
and it was just a real shock, and it's a real loss. But
We
he
think
was
we think of Ursula and the family, and I
indeed.
believe you're going to try and get over this Friday for the funeral.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
managed to get some seats booked, so that's
yeah,
fine, and I'll just
yeah,
stop over on the Friday night and come back Saturday. Yeah, but
yeah,
it's a sad occasion.
yeah,
He was a really nice guy, and obviously I worked with him for many years, and I think he retired from Aurigny in the early 2000s. I
yeah,
think
yeah.
can't remember exactly, but yeah,
There we are.
great loss. It's such a shame.
Moving on, and it's always difficult to move on when you've sort of done a mini eulogy like this. We're going to take a look at the Southampton Airport, the history of it, and then sort of perhaps if we've got enough time, do a few of your anecdotes like elephant shifting on Trilanders, etc., etc. Looking at Southampton Airport, we've both done some joint research on it, and originally it was Stoneham Farm and it
That's
was
right.
requisitioned in 1917.
Yeah,
What's an aircraft acceptance park supposed to be?
I don't know, to be honest. Well, it's presumably what they called it before it was an aerodrome,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
presumably. But
Uh,
I mean, the actual airfield started, the first flight from the airfield was in 1910.
hmm
And it was a guy called Edwin Moon, and he had a little monoplane called the Moonbeam. And he did the first flight from Southampton Airport as it became. Um, and I believe it's turned into the oldest operational airfield in the country because ever since 1910, it has been an operation airfield. Um, the original airfield took in a lot of Stoneham, which
mm,
you mentioned there, which is anybody who knows Southampton Airport, going back a while was where the Ford's motor factory was. And
yeah,
that was all part of the airfield originally. And a lot of the old um, aircraft manufacturers were based down that end. People like Supermarine, Avro, Saunders Row, old names, but they were all there. So the airfield actually took in quite a bit of land south of what there is now.
mm,
So that was how it all started. And then obviously it was taken over by the Air Ministry. But during the First World War, it was named Atlantic Park
yeah,
for a while, and that was really because it was a troop base for the U.S. Army and troops coming over to fight in the First World War, and that was they called it Atlantic Park, and it was a military base there for the American troops.
What's incredible about all this is that the Wright brothers didn't fly until 1903.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
Incredible amount of progress in a very short space of time.
Yeah, because I was looking at his aircraft that he flew, this Mr. Moon,
Yeah,
and really it was a little bit like the aircraft that Blériot
yeah,
used to fly the Channel.
yeah.
So yeah, but aviation moves really
It
quickly.
does, doesn't it? I mean, you mentioned the Air Ministry in 1918, and they then allowed a civil transport system. So it actually opened as a passenger airport at that point, um,
Yes.
and quite a few destinations.
Yeah, we've got sort of the Isle of Wight and
Yeah.
London are quite short flights,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
um, Plymouth and Bournemouth. But obviously, people were beginning to get the idea of aviation and flying. It was incredibly expensive in relative terms then. It was only the very few that could do any of that, really.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so it was a sort of commercial airfield with routes at that time. And then prior to the war breaking out, obviously the Spitfire was built there, and the first one flew in 1936.
Mm, mm. Southampton Corporation took it over the airfield in 1932, apparently.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting because, of course, now it's part of Eastleigh, isn't it?
Yes, it actually falls outside the Southampton boundary
Mm.
completely, I think. Maybe just the sun. Well, no, the whole thing does. It is outside. It's Eastleigh, which sometimes rubs a bit with Southampton. That it's called Southampton Airport, but it's not actually in their control.
Yeah, yeah. So, yes, they do take things a little bit personal, don't they? Um, the first Spitfires were built at Woolston. Whereabouts is that?
Woolston, the supermarine factory. If you're flying into Southampton, the first bridge you fly across is the Itchen Bridge, the new bridge
Yeah.
from the dock area of Southampton across to the east side of the river, and that's where Woolston is.
Oh, right.
So,
Okay.
and it also later on, some of the old buildings that they used for building the Spitfires obviously turned into what was Vosper Thornycroft, the shipbuilders.
Hmm.
But that's all on the eastern side of the river.
Right.
And
Okay.
as I say, if you know where Itchen Bridge is, the new bridge, the big
Yeah.
bridge,
I know the one you
that's
mean.
Woolston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so during the war, it was commissioned by the Royal Navy,
Yeah.
became HMS Raven.
Yeah, it sounds like Cold Rose in Cornwall,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just to
But
just to note the fact that the government and the military were actually owning it and running it for that period of time, I suppose.
that's right. Yeah. And
So
then, oh, sorry, go on.
yeah, I was going to say then we get the Channel Islands involved.
Well, yes.
1945. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, once the war was over, then obviously, unfortunately, it's still a grass airfield, but yes, and the type of aircraft that were using it, and the Channel Islands featured as the first sort of destinations, Guernsey, Jersey, and using old Dakotas and the Dragon Rapides, the
mm,
biplanes, and things like that. And yes, obviously, it started up as an airfield straight away after the war. Um, and once it got to the 1950s, it was really the Ministry of Aviation then that ran it. And I believe it became one of the top busiest airports in the country at that point.
yeah,
And of
yeah.
course, there was the introduction of the old Bristol freighters, the car ferry planes, um, which started up in the 50s and did Cherbourg and also Guernsey and Jersey, but predominantly Cherbourg. And
Incredible, isn't it, to think you could roll up at the airport, stick your car in the aircraft, and drive
oh yeah,
out the
you
other
just
end? Yeah,
yeah, I did. Yeah, I'm not quite sure whether the passengers were allowed to drive the car up the ramp. I think probably somebody did it for them. But you used to just come in at the southern end of the apron there, and you would be processed
yeah.
and drive onto opened up the big doors at the front. I mean, the aircraft itself, it defied gravity looking at it because it's a bit like a bumblebee. It shouldn't
Mm.
really fly.
Yes, yeah, 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 yeah,
But
yeah.
you could get three cars on it,
Hmm.
and the passengers, I think it was 12 or 14 maximum, and you're all in a cabin
Yeah,
down the back under the tail.
right.
Um, they used to do a tremendous amount of flights, really, through the 50s and 60s.
And you can remember those, can you?
I
Yeah,
can,
as
yeah.
a
Well,
youngster.
yeah, because when I was born and bred in Southampton, I lived
Yeah,
in Bitton Park,
yeah,
and there again, for those of you who know the area, if you're taking off towards Southampton in a southerly direction, I lived on the top of the hill that you're aiming at when you take off.
And you hope to clear.
Well, in those days, it literally was a bit like that because obviously, where I lived, I could actually look down into the airport.
Yeah.
And yeah, the old Bristol freighters, they used to struggle out and clear the rooftops. I mean, frighten everybody to death these days if you saw it. But it was, it was a busy airfield. But of course, eventually, the fact it was a grass runway was going to be a problem as
Yeah.
things got bigger
Yeah.
and heavier. And obviously, that's when, it got to the point where at the end of the 50s, the Ministry of Aviation had pulled out and it had reverted to Southampton Council or Corporation taking it over.
And they didn't
And
really want to retain it because a gentleman called J.N. Summer, who I think you've had dealings with over the
oh,
years.
Nat Summers, yeah,
Yeah.
he was, yeah,
He he
astute businessman.
he bought the airport and stuck in a concrete runway, which cost an arm and a leg in those days. And 273,000 passengers in the first year. Shows what
Yeah.
a difference, proper runway makes.
Well, yes, because at the end of the 50s, all the airline operations transferred to Bournemouth
Yeah.
because obviously they just couldn't cope with the grass field anymore. And as we've said once before, as soon as the hard runway was in, of course, the airlines really wanted to come back to Southampton because, from a connectivity point of view,
Yeah.
it was far easier, far more accessible, and that's where they really needed to be. And so they all came back. So there was a big leap in passenger traffic. I can't remember the exact figures, but yes, it was that first year, it was, over 250,000. And really just Channel Island traffic and a couple of Irish routes, I think, and
Mm.
Paris,
Yeah.
but not a sort of a huge number of routes as such. And
He,
it was the old airline BEA and Jersey
yeah.
Airlines.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He was a shrewd operator.
he was. Yeah, because I say he bought it for, I think it was only about £250,000
Yeah. Yeah.
from the council, which is a lot of money at that back then. But obviously, I don't know how much the runway cost. I think it was about 500,000 then
Yeah.
to put in the hard runway. But the potential was vast, really. And of course, everybody came back, and things just increased through the 60s.
The buildings that I remember in the early 80s were a part of Mr. Sumner, or had they been built beforehand?
Which one's this in the 80s?
Yeah, I'm thinking about Gate 2 and all that jazz.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, the old terminal
Yeah.
buildings were just the old World War One hangars. I
Oh,
mean,
right. Okay.
I don't know if you can see anything in detail of the picture right above my head, but it's
Mm,
a painting of the original old terminal building back in the 50s with
mm.
a BEA Dakota on the apron and a Rapide. But those buildings stayed in place in actual fact until the airport was redeveloped back in the beginning of the 90s.
So Gate
So
2.
gate two was our gate to go out of, obviously. Yeah, and I think it worked as a terminal building and an airport, despite all the problems.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, it operated despite everything. But he, yeah, Summers, he put a lot into it, but obviously he made a comfortable amount of money out of it, and he was not overly keen on spending too much for comforts in the terminal building or anything like
I'll
that.
tell you where he failed. You remember the car parks there? Very
Yeah,
dusty. He should have had a
yeah.
car wash facility for people as they drove out. He could have made a lot more money.
Yes, there is always that. But yes, it for I suppose from when it was developed in the middle 60s with the new runway until he sold it 24 years later
Yeah.
to the BAA took it over.
Yeah.
Um, he didn't overly sort of modernize it too much, put it that way. I think it went by as best it could. Wouldn't operate like that these days as an airport, obviously. And of course, it was a much simpler operation. I
Yeah,
mean,
sure. Yeah.
there was no security anywhere. You could just walk out onto the apron and, walk round to the control tower and go into air traffic. I mean, it just it wasn't a problem at
And
that
that, and
point, I
that
think.
that was just the passengers.
Yeah. But yeah, you did get all sorts of people wandering on the apron.
Peter de Savary, who was quite a well-known financier in those days,
Yes, indeed.
actually purchases the airport, and he has major redevelopment ambitions. But did that all fizzle out? Did he have to move on, or what happened there? I can't remember.
Well, I think he bought it. I'm trying to think of he initially bought it, and then the BAA took it off of him.
Yeah,
The Savary got the outline permission to have the airport to get the building, the terminal building rebuilt, and the airport terminal improved, and also the first bit when you come into the airport now, where the GPO mail office is, the
yeah,
great
yeah,
big sorting office there.
yeah,
Of course, that was part of the plan, was to have that as an industrial estate, which was a shame really from the airport's point of view, because that piece of land would have made the redevelopment of the whole terminal building and the airport so much easier
mm,
if they'd had that, because where the Royal Mail building is now was where the old terminal building was.
yeah.
And all that area was originally apron and airport, facilities. So if you look at it, the development of the new terminal building was really going into a narrowing area as you go north. And I think when the BAA took it over, I think if they'd had the foresight or the nonce to actually fight and say, if we want to, because the council wanted them to redevelop it.
Yeah,
But I think if they'd said, if we can't have all of the land, including what was aimed at the industrial estate, they could have said, well, if we can't have that, we won't have any of it.
yeah, yeah,
But in
yeah,
actual but in actual fact, they didn't fight for it. If it cost them more money to buy it, in the long run, it would have been cheaper, because a lot of the redevelopment of the airport had to be piecemeal while they moved one bit of the operation to here
yeah.
and then redevelop the other bit. Whereas if they'd got the whole area, they could have redeveloped it far more cheaply from the terminal building side, and the air traffic tower and everything else would have been far more straightforward.
I always thought it was a pity that they had to stick the long stay car park up in that north west corner. Um,
Well, yeah,
I mean, I always felt that, one of the hindrances is the fact that you haven't got a taxiway going up to the northern end of the runway.
that was always a moot point, because when they first did it, they were going to have a northern taxiway,
Yeah,
but they never actually, every year it got pushed out of the budget and not done. And then, of course, ultimately, they never did it. The car park there again, as you said, up the north end there, and having to get bus services backwards and forwards to it. If they'd had the whole original airfield,
mm,
then down the south of where the terminal building is, you could have had a multi-story car park
yeah,
quite easily.
yeah.
So yes, I think when you look at the plan of the airport, they boxed themselves into a bit of a corner with it and made the redevelopment complicated and very expensive over the course of time.
So the new airport, nearly 30 years old.
Yeah, indeed, 1994,
Yeah, yeah. And
when they opened the new building.
according to their records, they took in 2003 took 1 million passengers.
They did indeed. Yeah, that was originally when they redeveloped the airport. That was the figure of passengers that they were looking at.
Yeah,
When they redeveloped it, they wanted it to be a business airport with a little bit of holiday traffic, but
right.
basically a business airport. And
Okay.
1 million passengers was what the building was designed to actually accommodate.
Hmm.
Um, they had all sorts of really grand ideas. It's like the terminal building, they thought they could have a silent terminal building with no announcements, just
Oh, right.
screens.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you try doing that. It does. It doesn't work. I mean, it took us ages as operators behind the check-in desks to actually get a a join into the tannoy system to be able to make announcements from behind the check-in desk.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
but you're always having to make announcements. You
Well,
know,
you're
you
always
just can't
losing
get around it.
passengers. Yeah, losing
Always,
passengers
yeah,
and the like. It
yeah.
goes with it.
They go walkabouts all over the place and don't pay attention to you and all the rest.
Looking through 2006 to 2014, couple of acquisitions. Ferrovial, Spanish outfit they are, aren't they?
Yeah, they are
They
indeed. Yeah.
bought it out from BAA. Am I right in thinking BAA actually had to sell it because of the monopoly situation?
Yes, they did
Yeah,
because originally back at that point, the BAA operated Gatwick, Heathrow, Stansted, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, and Southampton.
yeah,
Southampton, when you look amongst those other six airports, is really small fry.
yeah,
So yes, in the end, they had to offload some of the other fields, Southampton amongst them, Aberdeen and Glasgow, I think, because um, sorry, Aberdeen. Sorry, it's Aberdeen, Glasgow, and Southampton now
yeah.
are a group of three airports that work together.
Right.
But Ferrovial, when they bought them, yes, Ferrovial, Spanish firm, they've got airports all over the world. I think they
Yeah,
had Sydney
yeah.
Airport.
Wow,
Yeah, so
that's interesting. And then
yeah,
in 2014, AGS Airports takes it over. What that
yeah,
was just a deal, was it? I suppose.
yes. I think the AGS is Aberdeen, Glasgow, and Southampton, the
Oh
three
right,
airports.
okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So they work together as a group of three, I think.
Mm.
Yeah. But it seems to be working, or well, you know, it did work well. And then, of course, obviously, you know, when we go forward, we get to the collapse of Flybe after the airport had built up, you know, all the way through, heading towards 2 million passengers a year. And then in 2020, in February, Flybe just went
Yeah,
bust.
yeah. Flybe
For,
one.
for, yeah, for the first time.
Yeah. But
But I mean,
was it unavoidable? I mean, looking at it from a business perspective, you have to say to yourself, you shouldn't put all your eggs in that one basket. And they
no,
certainly had, didn't they, with
yeah.
Flybe?
Yeah, I mean, Flybe, yeah, they're a good airline. They weren't a budget
No.
airline. They were a regional and short haul
Mm.
airline. They carried a lot of passengers, but I just think, and of course they went down the route of they had the Q400s that they used, plus they bought a load of Embraer 195
Yeah.
jets
Which they
in
ditched
the early
fairly
days.
quickly, didn't they?
They did. I
Yeah.
mean, at one point at Southampton, they used to have three of them based there
Yeah.
doing flights.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, I think at the end of the day, they just couldn't make the financial sense out of it. And they couldn't compete with the big boys like EasyJet and Ryanair and
Mm.
people like that. So I think, yes, there'd always been rumors that they were struggling. And yes, of course, eventually, sadly, they went under. And of course, as far as Southampton was concerned, that was about 85% of their traffic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the other operators really didn't make up much. I mean, obviously, you had Aurigny and you
Yeah.
had Blue Islands and the odd KLM flight to Amsterdam. But mostly it was Flybe, and
Yeah.
they used to do a huge number of French flights from Southampton. So yeah, it was a great loss, really. It was a shame that they went.
And
And of
then, of
course,
course, following that, COVID turns up.
well, yes, indeed. I mean,
And
that was
so it's a double whammy, wasn't it, for Southampton
yeah,
Airport?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously, along with other airports, I mean, everything just really ground to a halt. I mean,
Mm.
there was just nothing happening. The only activity at Southampton Airport for 2020 and into 2021 was the likes of Aurigny and Blue Island keeping the Jersey and Guernsey
Yeah.
lifeline route open.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, unfortunately, Alderney lost its direct flight for well over a year,
That's right.
which a great shame. I think that didn't start up again until May 21. Um, but yeah, the airport was dead. And I mean, there was one period of time through the following winter when they were closed at weekends, which had never happened.
A friend of mine, another friend of mine, because of course you are a friend of mine, said that he'd heard a whisper that currently they're losing about 1 million a week. Now that's unsustainable, isn't it?
I would have thought so. Yes, I'm not privy to their
No.
financial, state, but one would imagine looking at it, it would be difficult for them to be making any money on it at the moment. And I would think, yes, the losses could be quite high. They've managed to, we're back to a good core number of operators, I suppose,
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
airport now.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Aurigny and Blue Islands, and you've got Eastern, Logan Air, KLM, Aer Lingus now do quite a lot to
BA,
Ireland. So
BA at
um,
weekends.
BA, yes, last summer they did about 10 or 11 holiday destinations all the way through the summer, and they
Yeah.
were really, really busy and well subscribed. But of course, they're all on Saturday and Sunday, and
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
And they use the Embraer 195 for those. But yeah, so they've got to start. Aviation's picking up now after COVID, but they don't seem to be attracting any new operators or new routes at the moment, other than the hardcore of routes we've got, which are
Mm.
the Scottish routes, Northern England, the
Yeah.
Irish routes, Channel Islands, and
The
through
Oxford.
the winter.
Yeah.
Yeah, and through the winter now they've got EasyJet who do ski flights, and also BA City Flyer. Of course, they do some ski flights as well. Trouble is, there's no snow.
Bring your own snow.
Yeah.
Um, the thing is, though, of course, with the runway extension that presumably is proceeding still.
I haven't seen anything actually
No.
started yet, but I
No.
mean, all the planning hurdles have been crossed and passed, despite all various objections and everything. So
It
I
only
would have
works one way, doesn't it? Apparently,
what?
the runway, if it's extended.
Well, yes, it's extending it 160 meters to the north towards
Yeah.
Eastleigh. So
Yeah.
obviously, taking off in a southerly direction, you've got a bit more runway, but
Yes.
also in aviation, a lot of things can be like overruns on
Yeah.
landing and things
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah.
that can improve the operational attractiveness with the runway. It's not necessarily just a bit longer taking off, but
But
you've got the
I
landings
mean,
as well.
do they hope to get A320s in or
Well, that's what
737s?
EasyJet use at the
Yeah.
moment
Yeah.
through
But
the
they
winter
weren't.
to
Were they fully
Geneva.
loaded though?
I don't think they have a problem with it at the
Yeah.
moment, but then Southampton to Geneva, it's quite a short flight.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're not carrying too much fuel. So as far as I know, they get fairly good load factors,
Yeah.
but a slightly longer runway would give them the option of going a bit further. Um, but they probably do need to get a regular bigger carrier in there.
Yeah.
Who it would be, whether it be Ryanair or EasyJet, I don't know. And
They're
unfortunately,
probably fine with Ryanair, Morris, that they'll lose even more money because old O'Leary will rip them down to nothing, won't he, in terms of what he's prepared to pay?
well, yeah, that's true. I mean, I saw something somewhere where he reckons he'll be the only budget carrier in Europe if he gets his way.
Yeah. The other thing that obviously must affect it up to a point is the appearing dominance of Bournemouth.
Yeah, I was looking at that. I mean, Bournemouth it's still basically, as far as traffic, the sort of scheduled traffic in and out, is still basically holiday routes.
Yeah.
They don't have the business routes, if you like.
Right.
Um, but as we've said before, I mean, operationally, runway wise and everything, it's a much longer runway and it's easier to operate out of. And you haven't got a hill at one end getting in the way like Southampton has.
Mount
But
Wyatt.
yeah, Mount Wyatt, yeah. But I see the other thing that's really lifted off since COVID is um, the increase in private business jets and private jet travel. I mean, it, I mean, exponentially, it's just exploded. I mean, during COVID, I suppose, ultimately at the end of the day, when commercial travel or airlines were struggling, if you had the money, and there's plenty of people around who did,
Mm,
would charter a private jet.
mm,
And and when you look now at how many private executive type jets are flying around the world, it's huge. I mean, if you've only got to go on like Flight Radar
yeah.
and look at it, where you can see all the aircraft that are in the air at any one time, and the amount of them that are business executive type jets or private jets for hire is huge. And I mean, you've got them down in Guernsey as well, in Jersey.
Mm,
There's lots of
yeah.
private jets there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose, that could be the salvation of Southampton, could it?
Well, they're doing well. I mean,
Yeah.
living where I do, I hear enough of the aircraft going over. I don't complain about the noise though, but there's
Well,
can't do
you wouldn't do
that.
that, would you? You've still
No,
got
no,
your
no.
Aurigny earmuffs, presumably.
Yes. But go back to the modern aircraft, really, like with noise like that, it's so much quieter than it
Yeah,
ever
yeah,
used to be.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, going back to, as you said before, in the 50s with the old freighters and Dakotas and that, I mean, they used to struggle out into the air.
yeah,
I mean, now, where I live now, I mean, by the time the jets come over where I am, they're a couple of thousand feet or
yeah,
more up,
yeah,
way
yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah,
But there are a lot of private jets around, and there's a big market there,
yeah.
and that spreads itself around because Bournemouth do well out of it. Southampton's got it, and of course up the road at Farnborough is
Mm,
a real hub for that sort
yeah,
of activity.
yeah.
Unfortunately, there's probably a few shady people coming in and out as well. I
I
know.
couldn't possibly comment, but no, I think you're right from that point of view. So,
Yeah.
reasonably optimistic as to the survival of Southampton.
Well, I think so, Tony. I think gradually it is recovering.
Yeah,
Um, I'm sure that the councils want it to recover. They don't want it to disappear because it is just very important to the local area.
mm,
So I think this is where Eastleigh came into it with the planning.
yeah,
Um, they're pragmatic in effect that yes, having an airport where it is can be a problem, but it's really very, very important. And you don't want to lose it because once you've lost it, that's it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you know, and so yeah, I think optimistically, yes, as long as the operators can see their way clear to eventually making more profit out of it. And I think
It's the survival bit, isn't it, really? I mean, if they're losing
yeah,
that sort of money at the moment, they've got to get to
yeah,
hopefully to a positive tipping point where
yeah,
they are at least
yeah,
covering it all, if not
yeah.
making profits. But there we are.
I mean, how things change really. I mean, in my youth, I thought if you have a company, it has to make a profit. If it
Yeah,
doesn't make a profit, it fails.
yeah,
Now, companies seem to just run with huge debt.
yeah.
I mean,
The high tech ones being a good example.
yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, you take Aurigny back in the days when it was started.
mm,
It always turned a profit,
yeah, 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 yeah. No, it's
unlike now.
yeah, quite well. We don't know much about what they're turning. Apparently, the annual accounts are
Yeah,
public, are capable of public knowledge, but we don't see the management accounts, and they're the bits that show what routes are making losses and what routes are making profits and that sort of thing. But
yeah.
there we are. We've got
But
4 minutes left for a few anecdotes.
oh gosh,
So,
really?
did you rehearse your anecdotes?
Oh, I was only thinking of a few things, really. I mean, firstly, I must mention that March the 1st this year, Aurigny is 55.
Right.
Yeah, in
Okay.
1968 it started. But yeah, I was thinking the other day, something crossed my mind. I remember in the early days, um, there was a couple of elderly ladies who were getting on the aircraft and getting into row 4 on the Trilander, and I was putting them in there and actually seeing you do that and have a drink.
Yeah.
I was going to close the door and I thought, they've both got a jam jar with water in it. And I
What?
thought, I thought, no, it's not. It's got lemon and everything in it. And
Yeah.
they'd made up their gin and tonics for the flight, but it was in a jam jar.
How? So it sealed the top off, and they were just going
The
to open it
screw.
up. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Brilliant. I didn't
I mean,
realise that you offered full cabin service on those flights.
they obviously knew that we didn't. Yeah, but yeah, that was one funny thing. And I think the other thing, that was when you could take any liquid you liked
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
flight.
yeah,
And
yeah,
the other thing that was funny was the old gentleman traveling through after the 9/11 disaster, and his son had brought him down, and I was saying, got any liquids on you? No, 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 no. And his son said, how about your hip flask, Dad? He said, oh, no. I said, well, you can't take the liquid on. But he said, I'm not going to throw it away. And he just stood at the check-in desk and drank it. and
Oh,
the,
you
and the,
have to laugh at these things.
yeah.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
other thing was also after 9/11, when you could carry no hand luggage whatsoever, no liquids,
yeah,
paste, gels, or anything. And the hardest thing to get anybody to, or the ladies to give up was their lipstick, because you couldn't even carry that.
yeah,
They had to go in the hold luggage, and
yeah.
trying to get a lipstick off of ladies is quite difficult. And they'd just be sort of mending their lipstick before they put it in the suitcase. They'd have to go 2 hours without it.
So sort of put vast amounts on,
Yeah,
splodge
but
it
yeah,
on.
you used to have to say no. Even your lipstick, you can't take any of that through. Absolute disaster.
I'm afraid we've come to the end. You know.
Oh, Tony,
Yeah, I know. We'll have to do another one, won't we?
indeed,
Yeah,
indeed,
because
yeah.
everyone is always asking after you, and it's really good to have you on board, and so
Oh,
many
but
thanks.
I love talking to you, Tony, and it's nice to keep in touch with Audney as well because it's my favourite island.
That's very good of you to say that, Mr. Wyatt. All the very best. Thanks,
Thanks,
Maurice.
Tony. Bye
Bye.
then.